Welcome back to Lady Mythos, or welcome for the first time. Tonight, we begin with a god who never fought for a throne. He didn't command storms or tear kingdoms apart, and he never demanded to be worshipped. And yet, without him, none of the others would be remembered at all. So settle in. Let the day loosen its hold on you. You don't have to close your eyes, though you can if you'd like. You might follow the images as they unfold, or simply listen and let them come to you in their own way. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Is it a city under rain? A quiet apartment somewhere far from noise? Another continent entirely? I read every comment, truly. It reminds me that these stories travel farther than sand ever could. Tonight's story comes from ancient Egypt. Not from the height of empire, but from before empires. Before pyramids rose against the horizon. Before Osiris was betrayed. Before Horus stood before the assembled gods. Before a heart was ever weighed against a feather in the dark. Long before all of that, there was a figure standing at the edge of creation. He was watching. He was measuring. And slowly, he was writing. Thoth, the first keeper of the moon. The voice that shaped sound into spell. The hand that recorded the first lie and the first act of mercy. Most myths move past him too quickly. They speak his name, show him holding a reed, place him at the edge of greater dramas, and then turn away. But they forget something important. The one who writes the story decides what survives. And tonight, we follow him. We'll walk beside him at the first rising of the sun. We'll stand near him at the death of a king. We'll watch as gods argue and wound each other. We'll enter the silent halls of judgment. We'll descend into the Duat, where truth can weigh more than fear. This story won't rush you. It unfolds slowly, the way ink spreads across papyrus. Deliberate, patient, impossible to pull back once it settles. And before the first god ever spoke, before light divided the dark, there was already a record waiting to be written. So let the darkness settle now. Let the waters of none begin to stir. And listen, because this is where memory begins. Chapter 1. Dawn of Thoth. Before there was sky, there was water. Not the kind that moves in waves, not the kind that catches light and throws it back, but a depth without edge. Heavy, unmeasured, endless. The ancient Egyptians called it noon. It did not roar or shimmer. It didn't strain or stir. It simply existed, vast and without boundary. And somewhere within that dark expanse, before the first sunrise, before Ra, before earth rose from flood, there was a sound. Soft, measured, the faint drag of a reed across a surface, as if something or someone were already writing. There was no world yet, no kings, no gods seated in judgment, no moon suspended in the night. And still, the writing continued. Slow and patient, certain in a way that felt almost unsettling, as though what was about to exist had already been seen, as though memory had come before event. From that stillness, from that unlit horizon of water and ink, a shape began to rise. It did not rise in violence. There was no burst of flame, no tearing of the deep. It emerged quietly, with the steady authority of something that had always been there. Thoth, the ancient moon god of Egypt, keeper of time, the voice of measured thought, the one who would one day record the birth of light and the fall of kings. But in this moment, there was only water and the sound of writing in the dark. At first, he had no fixed form, at least not in the way later gods would be carved into stone. There was no profile yet, no temple relief, no crown or lunar disk. There was simply presence, a mind moving within the waters, a still intelligence passing through the deep, like a current that leaves no ripples behind it. Nun did not resist him, nor did it shape him. He rose distinct from it, not born from chaos, but emerging beside it, aware of it. And as he rose, the waters shifted slightly, not in storm or upheaval, but as though they were making space. Above him, the darkness thinned. Below him, the waters steadied. For the first time, something separated. Above and below. Measure entered the deep. Later ages would argue about his origin. Some said Thoth came from the lips of Ra, spoken into being as divine word. Others taught that he formed himself, an ibis rising from the flood, laying a cosmic egg from which light would hatch. But here, before doctrine and city and priesthood, there is only this: a consciousness rising from the deep. He watched. He measured. He understood. And when he lifted his hand from the waters, what clung to it was not water, but symbol. Lines that curved and straightened, marks that carried meaning. It was the first attempt to hold existence still. The first refusal to let something pass without record. The waters trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. Something new had entered the dark. Not domination, not conquest. Order. Far beyond him, still hidden beneath the horizon of nothingness, a faint glow began to gather. At first, it was barely more than suggestion, but Thoth turned toward it, and he wrote. He did not command the light to appear. He did not summon it from the deep. He simply observed it, and in observing, he gave it boundary. Light separated from darkness, the above lifted away from the below. Potential began to distinguish itself from void. The glow strengthened. The waters parted more clearly. A mound of earth pressed upward from the flood, the first solid thing in a world that had known only depth. From that rising mound, another presence stirred. Warmer now, brighter. The one who would become Ra. But even before the sun crowned the horizon of the newborn world, Its arrival had already been marked, recorded in steady lines. When Ra opened his eye for the first time, and light spilled outward in molten gold, he did not find emptiness waiting for him. He found a witness. The waters recoiled from the brilliance. Steam lifted in slow spirals. Gold and shadow folded over one another as the first sunrise carved its shape into the dark. Ra rose from the mound like flame given form, radiant and self-aware. When he spoke, his voice was not sound as mortals understand it. It was heat, expansion, the force that pushes horizon away from horizon. I am. The word carried across the waters like fire across oil. Mountains would one day remember that voice. Temples would try to contain it in stone. But in that first moment, it was simply declaration. Ra surveyed what had begun to unfold. The sky stretching upward, the earth pressing downward, distance forming between them. And then he saw him. Not blazing, not crowned, not demanding worship. A figure standing where light met the remaining dark. Ibis-headed, still. Ink-dark eyes reflecting the newborn sun without flinching. Ra did not ask who he was. Some truths do not require introduction. You measure, Ra said. It was not a question. Thoth inclined his head slightly. The movement was precise, almost minimal. Acknowledgement without submission. I observe, he replied. His voice did not burn or echo. It carried the calm weight of something already understood. Ra stepped fully into the sky, his light pushing the waters into clearer boundaries. You will count the days, he said. You will mark the hours. You will keep the balance between what rises and what falls. Thoth lifted his reed again, not in pledge, not in oath, simply to write. Light from darkness, sky from flood, word from silence. And as he wrote, the structure of the world tightened. Time began, not as chaos, but as sequence. Morning followed evening. Interval returned to return. Ra ascended higher, his solar bark already forming beneath him in brilliance. The journey across the sky had begun. Opposite him, a softer glow gathered, silver, measured, patient. The first reflection of light that would become the moon. Thoth did not seize it. He did not reach for dominion. He allowed it to settle around him, a quieter light, one that did not command, but watched. And so the balance took shape. Sun and moon, flame and reflection, declaration and record. As Ra's radiance spread across the forming world, and the first seeds of life stirred beneath his gaze, Thoth continued to write. Not hurried, not reactive, as though each event were fulfilling a pattern already understood. The first winds formed. The sky arched fully overhead. Creatures of air and water shifted in uncertain motion. And still, the faint sound of reed against surface continued. The world would remember Ra as creator, his eye, his heat, his authority. but it would remember because Thoth chose to mark it. Far beyond that first sunrise, beyond the shaping deserts and rivers yet to carve their beds, other things waited. Brothers who would one day turn against each other. A king who would fall. A son who would rise in fury. A heart that would tremble against a feather. All of it unwritten. All of it inevitable. Thoth paused, only once, and lifted his gaze from the forming earth. The sun had taken its path. The sky had found its curve. Time had begun its measured rhythm. But the world, she was still young. And youth carries danger. Ra would blaze. Creation would expand. Life would rise. And with it would come ambition, desire, jealousy, loss. Thoth lowered his reed. The moon gathered more fully around him now, not yet named, not yet claimed by temples, but already reflecting what the sun could not see. Light does not witness itself. It requires reflection. And so the balance settled. Day would declare, night would remember. And somewhere far ahead, when a sky goddess would be forbidden from giving birth, when time itself would stand in the way, it would not be flame that solved it. It would be calculation. But that story belongs to another night. For now, the world has begun, and someone is writing it. And the earliest age settled into rhythm, long before dynasties, before cities, before temples carved these moments into stone. Chapter 2. The Moonlit Gambit. Ages passed, and the world settled into rhythm. The sun rose and fell in steady procession. The sky held its curve above the earth, and the earth hardened beneath wandering feet. Cities had not yet risen, but the gods had taken their places. Ra ruled the day from his solar bark, his blazing eye sweeping across the horizon. And in time, even among gods, desire began to complicate order. Nut arched above the world, her body stretched in endless blue, her fingertips brushing one horizon while her toes touched the other. Beneath her lay Geb, the earth, pressed close in longing. Their closeness was constant. Their union felt inevitable. Ra saw it, and he did not approve. It was not jealousy that stirred in him. It was control. The sky must not collapse into the earth. The balance could not dissolve into embrace. Creation, if it was to endure, required distance. So Ra pronounced his decree. His voice carried through air and light and stone. Nut shall not give birth, he declared, on any day of the year. The words settled like iron. At that time, the year held 360 days. Each one belonged to Ra. Each one was sealed. Nut felt the curse at once. Life stirred within her, but time refused to open. No day would allow it. No dawn would welcome it. No dusk would release it. Even the gods felt the weight of what had been spoken. Geb rumbled in quiet fury beneath her. The younger deities turned their faces away. Only one remained still. Thoth, He had recorded the decree, every word of it, every boundary drawn, every finality implied. When he lowered his reed, he did not look toward Ra. He looked toward the year. 360 divisions, closed, complete, unyielding. Time had been structured. But structure, he knew, always leaves a narrow space where something else might fit. Newt descended to him in silver quiet, not in rebellion, not in open defiance, but in calculation. "Is there no path?" she asked. Her voice felt vast, like a sky holding storms not yet born. Thoth did not answer immediately. Above him, the moon drifted full and luminous, its light softer than the sun's, but steady, whole in its measure. He studied it, not for beauty, but for number, not for glow, but for fraction. "Ra sealed the days," Thoth said at last. "But he did not seal what lies between them." Newt did not yet understand. She did not need to. Thoth had already begun to think. That night, as Ra descended beyond the horizon and the sky deepened into indigo, Thoth rose into the silver light. The moon waited, round, whole, untouched. It was not yet crowned in temples, not yet given the layered names of later ages. It was simply lunar power, self-contained and radiant. Thoth did not challenge it with thunder or command. He approached it the way one mind approaches another. "A game," he said. The moon did not speak, but its glow shifted as though considering. "And what do you wager?" asked the silence between them. "Light," Thoth replied. A board formed in the space between them, not of carved wood or painted squares, but a grid of faint stars suspended in the dark, each point carefully aligned. The pieces were fragments of illumination, small shards of lunar brightness, cool and steady. The first move was subtle, a placement, a shift, a quiet calculation. The moon responded. The board shimmered. Nothing else in the world paused, yet something delicate tightened in the night. Newt watched from her high arch, bound and waiting. The second move followed the first, then the third. Each time Thoth won, the moon dimmed. Not in any way mortal eyes would notice, but in a way that could be measured. 1/72 of its light. Then again and again. Nothing was stolen. Everything was won. Fairly, precisely, without haste. The moon grew thinner, not in defeat, but in redistribution. Thoth did not smile. He did not gloat. He gathered what was yielded with steady hands. Silver fragments of time collected like quiet offerings. Night after night, the game continued. There was no anger in it, no violence, only calculation. Until at last, the sum was complete. 5 full measures of light, 5 days unclaimed by decree. The moon remained luminous. Its cycles were intact, its dignity undiminished. It had not been conquered. It had been negotiated with. Thoth descended. The 5 days hovered around him, outside the calendar, outside Ra's command, beyond the structure of the year itself, untouched by the curse. He approached Newt once more. "The year is sealed," he said gently. "But these are not of the year." And for the first time since Ra's decree had fallen across the heavens, hope moved across the sky. Chapter 3. The 5 Sacred Days. The 5 days did not belong to the year. They carried no seal of Ra. They stood outside the calendar itself, suspended between what was permitted and what was forbidden. When the first of those days arrived, the sky felt different. Not darker, not brighter, simply unclaimed, as though time itself had loosened its grip. Nut arched across the horizon, no longer restrained by decree. The air held a tension that had nothing to do with storm. Thoth stood nearby, silent, recording. He did not interfere or command. He simply marked what unfolded. On the first of the 5 days, Nut gave birth to Osiris. The world did not shake. There was no lightning to announce him, and yet something in the earth seemed to steady. Osiris emerged with a presence that felt grounded, as though the soil and the river had already recognized him. Beneath the surface, Geb stirred, the land responding to its future king. Thoth wrote the name with care. Osiris. He did not embellish it or attempt to foresee its end. He placed it into the record as it was. The first of the 5 had entered the world. The second day arrived with clearer light. Horus the Elder was born beneath open sky, and from the beginning his gaze was lifted upward, sharp and searching, drawn to distance rather than ground. There was height in him already, a sense of horizon carried in his posture. He was not yet the avenger, not yet the falcon who would clash with Set, but something in him was aligned with vision and reach. Thoth recorded the name. Horus. For a brief moment, the sky itself seemed to widen. The 3rd day did not unfold gently. When Set was born, the air shifted. The wind moved harder across open spaces, and desert heaps seemed to rise where none had been before. His presence did not settle into the land the way Osiris had. It moved through it, restless, uncontained. Thoth observed without judgment and wrote the name. Set. He did not hesitate. He did not amend the record. Order does not exclude chaos. It includes it, and keeps account of it. The 4th day carried a different kind of intensity. Isis entered the world quietly, but not passively. Where Osiris had steadied and Set had stirred, Isis watched. Her presence felt deliberate, as though she understood something others had not yet glimpsed. In later ages, she would gather scattered pieces, speak hidden names, and bend divine law with careful hands. But on this day, she was simply born. Thoth recorded her name. Isis. The ink did not waver. The final day arrived in softer light. Nephthys was born at the edge of shadow, not dominant, not loud, but necessary. She carried dusk within her, that quiet space between endings and beginnings. Where Isis would stand at the center of events, Nephthys would often stand beside them, witness, support, mourner, guardian of thresholds. Thoth wrote the final name, Nephthys. 5 days, 5 births, 5 forces introduced into a world still finding its balance. When the 5th day ended, the year resumed. Ra's decree had not been broken, it had simply been stepped around. 360 days continued as before, but now they held something new within them. Brothers and sisters, potential and tension. Balance had shifted, though not violently, quietly. Thoth closed the record of the 5 days. He did not smile or claim victory. He had not opposed Ra. He had expanded time. And in expanding time, he had made room for destiny. Far ahead, beyond celebration, beyond childhood, threads were already drawing tight. Osiris would rule. Set would not accept it. Isis would refuse to surrender to death. And one day, a son would stand before a tribunal of gods. All of it began here. Not with war, but with calculation. Chapter 4. Osiris's Fate. Osiris grew into his rule as though it had been waiting for him all along. Where he walked, the land seemed to respond. The Nile rose in its season. Fields softened beneath the flood and hardened in time for planting. People learned the rhythm of cultivation and rest under his guidance. He did not govern through fear, he governed through structure. Later generations would say that he gave Egypt its shape, laws, rights, and the steady belief that a kingdom could be ordered without constant force. But calm does not please everyone. Set watched. Not openly hostile, not reckless, just watching. He belonged to the red land beyond the fertile banks, to desert wind and untamed spaces. He was not wicked by nature. He was necessary. The desert keeps the valley from growing complacent, but necessity does not always accept second place. Osiris, crowned and welcomed, surrounded by abundance, began to feel like a boundary Set could not cross. The resentment did not erupt. It gathered slowly. A silence held too long. A courtesy offered without warmth. A presence that stood just slightly apart. Thoth observed it all, not with alarm, but with precision. He recorded festivals and offerings. He noted where each god stood in the hall. Distance, repeated often enough, becomes intention. The plan unfolded during a celebration. Torches burned low, wine sweetened the air. Music filled the chamber. Set presented a gift, a chest, polished and exact. Its proportions were flawless, its carved lines deliberate, as though even the wood had been measured with care. Whoever fits inside it perfectly, Set announced lightly, may claim it. Laughter rippled through the hall. One by one, guests tried. Some were too tall, some too narrow, others too broad. Each attempt ended in amusement. Set waited. At last, Osiris stepped forward. A king does not shrink from challenge in his own hall. He lay down inside the chest. It fit him perfectly. The lid slammed shut. Bolts slid into place. Seals were pressed tight. The laughter vanished. Osiris struck the inside once. The sound was dull, swallowed by wood. Set stood above the sealed chest. His expression did not flare with rage. It settled into something steadier. Certainty. He had not defeated Osiris in combat. He had used trust. The chest was carried to the Nile. Night had fallen, and torchlight broke across the river in trembling lines. Without ritual or ceremony, the chest was pushed into the water. For a moment, it floated. Then it sank. The Nile closed above it, as though nothing had disturbed its surface. Egypt did not yet know its king was gone. But the balance had shifted. Isis did not cry out. She grew still. Grief at that scale becomes focused. She understood immediately that disappearance was the true weapon. If Set controlled the story, he would control memory. And memory was the one thing she would not surrender. She left before the second sunset. No crown, no procession. Nephthys followed, without announcement. The Nile had carried the chest far north. Rumors travelled back. A strange tree growing with unnatural speed near a distant shore. A palace built around its trunk. Isis followed those rumors. In a foreign court, she concealed herself and waited. When she learned that a palace pillar had grown around a sealed chest discovered in the river, she requested it as a gift. The wood was cut open. Osiris lay within, unchanged, unmoving. She did not collapse. She began to work. They carried the body back toward Egypt. Set found them. How he knew is told differently in different temples. What matters is that he came. And when he saw Osiris restored to land, he acted without hesitation. He tore the body apart, not wildly, but deliberately. Each piece was scattered across Egypt, into marsh and desert, along riverbank and hidden grove. If resurrection were attempted, the entire land would have to be searched. Set believed that would make it impossible. Isis did not surrender to despair. She drew in a steady breath and began again. Nephthys stood beside her, and Thoth stepped forward. He did not blaze into the night. He did not strike at Set. He knelt. "You cannot restore what is lost," Nephthys said quietly. "You can," Thoth replied, "if you know the words." He began to speak, not incantations for spectacle, but names. He named the parts of the body. He named the places where they lay. He named the paths between them. In Egyptian thought, naming is claiming. Isis listened and memorized. And so the second search began. Across Egypt they travelled, through reed marsh and across hot sand, along unstable riverbanks where the current pulled hard. Each fragment was found, wrapped, guarded. Set watched from a distance. He waited for exhaustion. It did not come. Thoth guided them with words for preservation and protection, words that prevented decay from finishing what violence had begun. At last, the body lay reassembled, whole. Silence settled across the marsh. Even Set hesitated. The moon stood high. Thoth knelt beside Osiris's body. Resurrection in Egypt is not reversal. It is alignment. He traced measured gestures above the still chest and spoke again, carefully and with intention. Ka, Ba, Ren, Ib. Essence, spirit, name, heart. Each must recognize the others. Isis leaned close, pressing her forehead to Osiris's. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Osiris drew a single breath. His eyes opened, not in confusion, but in awareness. He saw Isis. He saw the night. He sensed Set beyond the reeds. Set did not interfere. He understood what this was. Not victory. Transition. Osiris reached for Isis. No proclamations were made. The moment did not need them. From that union, Horus would be conceived. But Osiris did not rise to rule again. The breath returned to him was not meant for the living world. Thoth spoke once more, not to summon, but to guide. The throne of the living is closed, he said softly. Another throne awaits. The air behind Osiris deepened, not into darkness, but into passage. The Duat. Osiris stepped backward into it, not falling, not fading, simply stepping. He became the first ruler of the dead. The reeds stilled. Set withdrew. The throne of the living remained contested. Isis straightened. Her grief had become direction. Horus would not be born into peace. Thoth closed the record. He did not call what had happened a miracle. He called it precedent. Death had been crossed, but not undone. The Duat had gained its king, and the living world still held its conflict. Horus would not remain hidden forever. Set would not relinquish power. And this time, calculation alone would not be enough. Chapter 5. Rise of Horus. Horus did not storm the palace. He did not gather an army or strike under cover of night. When he left the marshlands, he walked openly. He was no longer hidden among reeds. He carried his father's name without concealment. The throne of Egypt was occupied. Set ruled, and he had ruled since Osiris's disappearance. He ruled with a force few dared question directly. But lineage carries its own authority. Horus entered the Hall of the Gods not as a conspirator, but as a claimant. Ra presided. Age had not dimmed his brilliance, but it had sharpened his caution. The gods gathered. Some stood near Set, deities of desert and storm, forces shaped by harsh land and necessary defense. Others leaned more subtly toward Horus, remembering Osiris's cultivation and balance. Thoth stood between them, reed in hand, tablet ready. He did not stand beside either claimant. He stood where truth required recording. Horus spoke first. "My father ruled by right," he said. "He was killed by deception. The throne is mine by birth." Set did not raise his voice. "Birth does not guarantee strength," he replied evenly. "Egypt requires protection. I defend Ra against chaos itself. I stand on the prow of the solar bark when Apophis rises." The argument carried weight. Even Ra did not dismiss it lightly. The tribunal did not end that day, nor the next, and not the one after that. The dispute stretched on, years in some tellings. Each time the gods assembled, Thoth recorded the arguments without alteration. Each time, Ra hesitated. He valued order, but he feared instability more. Horus grew impatient. Set grew sharper. Debate slowly shifted toward contest. If lineage and rhetoric could not decide the throne, perhaps endurance would. The first trials tested strength, races across water, transformations of form. Challenges meant to measure survival itself. Neither yielded easily. Each returned, claiming advantage. The tribunal reconvened. Thoth wrote, Ra delayed. Balance remained unsettled. Then, during one confrontation, no longer confined to ritual framing, restraint finally broke. Horus and Set clashed without rules to contain them. Claws met blade. Storm met falcon. The sky darkened under their struggle. And in that violent exchange, Set struck Horus across the face. The blow was not accidental. It was aimed. Horus fell. When he rose, one eye had darkened, damaged. The moon's reflection fractured in its light. Silence spread through the assembly. An injury among gods was no small matter. Set stood, breathing hard, neither triumphant nor apologetic. Horus steadied himself. He did not retreat, but the wound remained. Thoth stepped forward. He did not accuse. He did not rebuke. He examined the injury the way one examines a miscalculation. He placed his hand near Horus's face and spoke quietly, not loudly, not theatrically, carefully. He gathered what others could not see, fragments of light scattered within the damaged eye. Piece by piece, he drew them back together. He restored what had been fractured. The eye cleared. Not identical to before, stronger, marked. The eye of Horus, the wedge-at, became a sign of restoration, of wholeness regained through precision. When Thoth finished, he did not turn toward Set. He turned toward the tribunal. The dispute had crossed into something irreversible. This was no longer argument alone. It was inheritance contested by force. The gods reconvened again. Arguments resumed. Ra wavered. Neith was consulted in some traditions. Shu spoke. Others withheld certainty. But momentum had shifted. Horus had been struck and restored. He had endured violence and remained standing. Set had demonstrated strength and revealed aggression. And Thoth had repaired what chaos attempted to fracture. The throne could not remain undecided forever. The tribunal gathered once more, not in ceremony this time, but in fatigue. Years of dispute had worn patience thin. Ra sat at the center, his light steady but measured. Horus stood upright, the restored eye unwavering. Set stood firm, neither apologetic nor submissive. Thoth stood between them, tablet ready. This time, the debate did not spiral. Neith's counsel was recalled, wisdom favoring rightful succession. Shu spoke again of balance. Even Ra, who had hesitated so long, saw the pattern clearly now. Strength alone does not secure a throne. Lineage alone does not protect it. But legitimacy, tested and endured, stabilizes it. Ra rose. The hall quieted.
Horus, he declared, is heir to Osiris. The throne of the living belongs to him.
The words settled like stone. Set did not bow immediately. His jaw tightened, but he did not strike. He had argued strength. He had demonstrated power. He had injured and been witnessed. The tribunal had chosen. Horus stepped forward. He did not celebrate. He accepted. Thoth recorded the ruling without flourish. The dispute was concluded. The throne of the living had its king. And Set, he was not erased. He remained necessary, defender against chaos, force of desert and storm. But he would not rule Egypt. Horus took the crown, and when he did, he lifted his restored eye, not in threat, but in offering. Not to Ra, not to the tribunal, to Osiris. The eye, once broken and restored, became a symbol of balance regained after fracture. And in the Duat, Osiris received it. The king of the dead accepted the offering from the king of the living. Above and below aligned. The age of dispute had ended. But the work of judgment had not. Because every king rules only the living, and every life, in time, crosses into shadow, where Osiris waits. Chapter 6. The Hall of Two Truths. When the throne of the living was secured, balance returned to Egypt. But balance on earth is never the final measure. Every life, no matter how ordered, moves eventually toward shadow. Beyond the horizon of the sun, beyond the reach of breath, lies the Duat. It is not a place of chaos. It is a place of reckoning. Within it stands the Hall of Two Truths. It is not built of mud brick or carved stone. It exists instead in structure, in law, in inevitability. The ceiling arches high, though no sky can be seen. 42 assessors stand in quiet rows, each embodying a principle of Ma'at. Truth, justice, order, balance. At the center rests a scale, perfectly balanced, unadorned, unforgiving. Anubis stands beside it, jackal-headed and exact in his movements. He does not threaten. He measures. On one side of the scale rests a heart. On the other, a single feather. The feather of Ma'at. Light. Exact. Opposite the scale, weights are meet. Part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. She does not snarl or lunge. She waits. She does not chase what fails. She consumes it. And beyond them all, enthroned in still authority, sits Osiris. He is no longer the ruler of fields and harvest. He is the ruler of passage. His skin carries the green of renewal. His gaze remains steady. He does not speak first. The scale will speak for him. Near it stands Thoth, reed in hand, tablet prepared. He does not weigh or condemn. He records. Fear does not move him. Pleading does not sway him. His role is simple. Accuracy. Now imagine one soul entering the hall. Not a king, not a priest. An ordinary person. A farmer, perhaps. Someone who once walked beneath the same sun that now rises over Horus's Egypt. The soul does not tremble wildly, but it feels the weight of itself. Anubis gestures toward the scale. The heart is placed carefully on one side, not as metaphor, as truth. In Egyptian belief, the heart carries memory, intent, action. What was done when no one watched, what was chosen when choice mattered. The feather rests opposite it, still. Thoth watches the beam of the scale. The farmer begins the negative confession. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not caused pain without cause. The 42 assessors listen. They do not interrupt. They observe. The scale tilts slightly, then steadies. A breath passes. The heart does not outweigh the feather. Anubis nods once. Amit lowers her gaze. Thoth writes. Not poetically, not symbolically. He records the verdict. True of voice. The soul is permitted to pass. Osiris inclines his head, not warmly, not coldly, but in acknowledgement. And the soul moves beyond the hall, into fields that mirror the Nile. into work without suffering, into continuity. But not every heart balances. Sometimes the scale dips heavily. Sometimes silence lingers longer than comfort allows. Then Amit steps forward. There is no spectacle, no dramatic punishment, only erasure. To fail the scale is not torment, it is unmaking. And Thoth records that as well, without satisfaction, without sorrow. Balance must be kept. The hall does not sleep. It does not close. It receives kings and children alike. Each time, Thoth stands beside the scale, not as judge, not as savior, but as witness. He records the weight of every life. He notes the truth of every claim. He preserves what cannot be argued away. Above, Horus rules the living. Below, Osiris rules the dead. And between them, Thoth writes. Chapter 7. The Book of Thoth. Long after the tribunal ended, long after Horus ruled and generations passed beneath his line, the name of Thoth remained. It was not shouted, it was not carved only into monuments, it was whispered, in temple libraries, in sealed chambers, in rooms where light was permitted only in narrow measure. It was said that Thoth had written more than judgments, more than decrees, more than the record of kings and souls. He had written a book. Not a scroll displayed openly, not a teaching recited to novices, but something hidden from ordinary hands. The Book of Thoth. The stories about it changed depending on who told them. Some claimed it was written in the language of the gods, a script never meant for human mouths. Others said it contained the names of every star. Some believed it held words capable of commanding creatures of land and water. And there were those who whispered that whoever read it could see the Duat while still alive, could understand the sun's movement before it rose, could hear what passed between gods when mortals were not meant to listen. But every version agreed on one thing. The book was not a gift. It was a burden. In later centuries, a prince named Setna would search for it. In that tale, the book lay hidden beneath the Nile, guarded by serpents and layered illusions. When Setna finally found it and read its words, he gained knowledge beyond ordinary comprehension. He could understand the speech of birds. He could manipulate divine games. He could see what others could not. And yet, his life began to unravel. Visions came without invitation. Restlessness followed him like a shadow. The cost of knowing too much revealed itself slowly. The Book of Thoth does not simply inform, it alters. And change, without balance, unsettles everything it touches. But even before that later story, before Setna's search, the idea of the book had already taken root, because Thoth himself embodied it. He was the record of beginnings, the measurer of time, the healer of fractured light, the witness at every judgment. He knew the hidden names. He understood the architecture of creation. And yet, He did not rule. He did not demand temples of dominance. He did not seize crowns. He wrote. And writing creates distance. To record is to stand slightly apart. To understand fully is often to stand alone. Imagine him now, not at creation, not in the tribunal, not beside the scales, just in quiet. The moon rising in a slow arc, a reed moving across a surface, the world continuing its endless turning above and below. He has seen kings crowned and buried. He has seen disputes argued and settled. He has watched hearts weighed and sometimes erased. He has witnessed resurrection and transition. And still, he writes. Not to interfere, not to command, to preserve. Because without record, there is only repetition without memory. And memory is what separates chaos from order. The Book of Thoth, if it exists as an object, may remain hidden, but its essence lives on in every careful measurement, every written line, every calculation of stars, every scale balanced against a feather. Knowledge carries power. It also carries isolation. To understand the full structure of the world is to stand slightly outside it, and Thoth has always stood just beyond the flame's edge, watching, measuring, writing. Epilogue. The later echoes of Thoth. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, temples were built, then abandoned. Foreign rulers crossed Egyptian sand, and Thoth did not disappear. He changed. In the Ptolemaic age, when Greek words echoed through Egyptian halls, the ibis-headed god found another name. Hermes. Not a replacement, a recognition. The Greeks saw in Thoth their own god of wisdom and writing, and the two were drawn together. From that meeting emerged Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes. Not entirely Egyptian, not entirely Greek. Something in between. A bridge between worlds. Priests spoke of the 42 books of Thoth. 42. Like the assessors in the Hall of Two Truths. They said these books contained astronomy, medicine, ritual, sacred speech, even the architecture of heaven and earth itself. Whether such volumes ever existed as objects matters less than what they represent. Over time, Thoth became the embodiment of total knowledge, not only memory, but understanding. In Hermopolis, his worship continued. In Thebes, other lunar names rose in prominence. The moon did not vanish from him. It evolved. Egyptian gods did not erase one another. They overlapped, they merged, they shifted as centuries passed. And still, the ibis remained carved in stone. The reed remained poised in hand. The act of writing endured. Myths change, names evolve, empires pass, but the need to measure, to understand, to remember, that remains. And so does he. Somewhere in the quiet turning of night, in the steady arc of the moon, in the careful recording of what has been and what will be, Thoth stands, watching, measuring, writing. Thank you for spending this time in the shadow of ancient Egypt. If you are drifting now, let the story settle with you. Let the waters grow still. Let memory hold what it must. Until next time, rest well. Yours, Lady Mythos.